Hello, I'm Toycat, and there is a falling birth rate in the UK which is highlighting our huge demographic challenges. To put it simply, the number of live births in England and Wales was the lowest since 2002, not as a percentage, as an overall number. And so as all of the Western world goes through the same problem, we start to realise that if we're not replacing ourselves at large enough numbers, then clearly we need to work out who is going to. And the easiest solution to that is becoming increasingly unpopular, so what do you do instead? Well, today I wanted to talk about what you can actually do to increase a country's birth rate, which as you can see in the UK is pretty dire. I want to talk about whether people will even have more children, no matter what incentives you give them, will it even affect that? And then finally, I want to go into the country with the lowest fertility rate in the world, and just for fun, we'll go through some fun maps as we do this. So first things first, here is the graph showing the birth rate in the UK in absolute numbers. So because this is absolute numbers, as England and Wales's population increases over time, you should expect this to see a steady incline, but instead you see it sort of flatten out somewhere around 1900, and that was when our population was tens of millions lower than it was right now, and as you can see, it doesn't just flatten out, it's been broadly on a downwards turn since then. Our population is going up, but our number of live births is going down, which basically means that our population, which basically means that if you look at our fertility rate, it goes from being 2 to 3 children in 1970 to 1 to 2 children right now. It was even higher before the Industrial Revolution, of course, as it was in many parts of the world, but this means that we are seeing a huge collapse of again, I guess you could say, of people who were in England and Wales during this time period, and this is a gap which is more or less, by any major economist, has to be plugged via immigration. Basically, everyone says the solution is more migration, because you need to have a certain number of people aged 15 to 64. Traditionally, that's the working age. I would say nowadays it's closer to 21 or 25 to 64, but at this point in time, you need to have people who are in that age cohort so that they can work and make the economy do things, but also so they can pay the taxes and have the public services which people increasingly need. As people get older, they draw a lot more from the government. You stop contributing at a certain age and start saying, I want a pension, I want unlimited healthcare, I want bus passes and all the other weird things that you get as you grow older, and you need those things to be paid for by people who are 15 to 64. You could theoretically not have that whole system, but it would be that would be a system you have to put in place from the very beginning. You'd have to have a managed decline, which would be a very hard thing to do, and so instead we built our society around at least maintaining the current numbers of people, if not increasing them every year. And so how do you do it? Well, if you want to have an economy that grows, you're going to need to increase your fertility rate or your immigration rate. Right now in the UK, we have about 1.61 children per woman, which is actually up from the historical low, although again, it seems like we're kind of bouncing back downwards from that. You can see that is actually lower than certain countries like France, Denmark or Sweden, but above a substantial amount of Europe. So what are European countries doing to raise theirs is a very fun question, and it's one that I put really interestingly here in this Politico article, saying the populist right wants you to make more babies. Indeed, the populist countries across the world are trying to say, as an alternative to immigration, have more people, but how do you actually make them do that? Well, here are a bunch of solutions they're trying. So I want to also say first that actually, does it matter how many, because all sorts of countries are trying different things. Hungary is trying to spend 5% of its national GDP to prop up the birth rate, and they've got some insane policies, at least if you're not from Hungary. They have, if you have 4 children, you have a lifetime exemption from paying tax. Put this in other words, if you can pay your tax bill in Hungary in money, a fairly large tax bill across your life, or you can pay it in children. This sort of makes sense, that if there's something a country really needs, even more than money, you can pay with that rather than that. It feels very weird to say it that way, but that's what Hungary's doing. But also, they'll give you an upfront loan of about $36,000, which is written off when you have a 3rd child. In other words, saying, here is 36 grand on top. They're not just saying, we will stop having you pay us, we will pay you to please have those children. And indeed, you can see there's also financial help for buying a home. There's even government-owned fertility clinics, and although Politico takes a view of this that it's only a 2 out of 5 solution, I would say this is actually working fairly well with their own data. Hungary went from having about 1.3 births per woman in 2009, it stays to about 1.35 in 2013, but ever since then it has been steadily increasing. Admittedly, the point where I would say it's ineffective is the fact that it's gone from 1.3 to 1.6 by spending 5% of its GDP. That is a remarkably poor return on money. money, especially given that the actual replacement rate is about 2.1 children per woman, and so, because every woman needs to have at least 2 more people, like a man and a woman, and then if you want to have a population continue, that's what you need, plus some number of people die. And so really you want 2.2 or above if you're looking to grow as a country, as we all are, but most countries in Europe aren't managing that, and so, yeah, that's a big problem. But I think before we talk about the other solutions, the other, like have tax breaks or have, fun give outs to people, we should ask the question of, like, do people even want to have children? Again, if you think about the fact that in Hungary they're going to give you this huge lifetime exemption from tax, you should probably ask at some point, like, well, will people have children if they get these lifetime exemptions? Like, it could be that you're helping people who already want children to have these, or it could just be that, yeah, no matter what you offer people, they're not having children. It's one of the biggest decisions you can make, and that's where this fun paper from the OECD comes in. They asked people, generally speaking, what do you think is the ideal number of children for a family? Let's zoom in this, make it extra big. And after asking those people, they concluded that in the average of OECD, the Organization of Economically Developed Countries, the mean number of children that men would like to have is just under 2.2. Don't ask how horrifying it is to have 0.2 of a child, and for women it's around 2.3, which is slightly above the population replacement rate, which means that, funnily enough, internally, if you just ask us and then, if we think about it, we want to have about the right number of children for the circumstances. It's fun that we have that inside our heads, and then we go out into the real world and all of the problems occur, and the actual birth rate looks like 1.8 or 1.2, and we have substantially fewer children than we want. And so really, if you're a smart government, rather than just throwing money at the problem, you need to address what is the difference between the number of children we want and the number of children we have, and how can you solve that? Well, in Scandinavia, where birth rates are actually quite high, Sweden it's at 1.6, higher than Hungary, they have a solution of saying, okay, let's make it easy for women to have because we live in a world where women have careers now and have for a substantial amount of time. What if women could have their kids and continue having that career? They're invested heavily into early childhood education so that children can be looked after while both parents work. They have subsidized creches with caps on costs, which means that you only pay 11% of the cost of childcare, the lowest fees in the developed world, and basically trying to encourage you to have your child be looked after somewhere. They also have generous parental leave, and basically it becomes a huge perk that you get, not just in terms of money, but in terms of what you're expected in a society. Your child will be looked after for you, you'll get time off work. There are all sorts of fun benefits to having a child so that you'll want to do it, but it's not actually working. It might have worked in the past, it might have maintained a higher birth rate than expected, but as you can see, Sweden is slowly falling down the list right here, and as a result, you can't really say that it's a functional system. And so Finland has a 1.5 birth rate per woman, which is a big problem. These are very, very much below 2.1, and so it's not a great solution. Similarly, in the Mediterranean, they have a high amount of religion. A lot of people, one of the fun things about birth rates is there are two big things that you can say lead to us slowly decreasing our birth rate. You can look at this map and say, well, it went down after the Abortion Act, but not by as much as you'd expect if that's the main factor. It went down during the wars and then immediately went up after them, but then kind of came right back down afterwards. So the two good things we can say as far as having more people are, I guess we could have wars, immediately end them, and hope that we get a baby boom. That doesn't seem very viable. And the other thing that we could say is that clearly, religiosity is one of the things that is a key factor in countries that have a lot of children. As countries become less religious and more wealthy, they generally have fewer children. I think you could argue this is like a good point, right? Because the meaning in life can come from having children, but if you are less involved in religion, the meaning is something you think about less than, say, the money and how you get it on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, Mediterranean solution isn't working, but France's surprisingly is. France doesn't even have this huge system in place. They have, sure, some cash subsidies for family of children. It's more than, they double when you get to a third child, in contrast to the UK, where benefits cap at 2 children. Also, families of 3 or more children benefit from a large family status, which comes with benefits such as reduced train travel. Pension payout is increased by 10%. Oh, that's really interesting. Have a bunch of children so you can get paid more when they're gone. That's it. I like that as a solution. But yeah, overall, it's the best solution so far in Europe. But notably, it still brings them at 1.84. If you look at this map of fertility rates, or indeed, if you want to look at this map of fertility rates, you can see that France is always an outlier in that they have more children than the rest of Europe, alongside Ireland too, interestingly enough. but still, they are having a birth rate which is not necessarily as high as you would actually like anywhere in the world. And so, are they actually solving their problem? No, they're just kind of having less of a, they're having less of a problem than they otherwise would. And is that the best we can actually hope for? Genuinely, in Europe, it looks like the answer is yes. Again, in the United States and Australia, both have also fairly high birth rates relative to European counterparts, but this is also generally done by bringing people in to have children. And so that is the kind of dark solution to the problem, is that if you want to, unless you are willing to accept a decline in your population, a decline in your economy, a decline in your relevance as a country in the world, you need to work out how to have more people, and we have no solutions that work fully. The best one in Europe is, maybe you could combine Hungary's solution with Sweden's solution with the solution of France. Now, you could take all of these perks and put them on board, but at that point, is that unaffordable for an economy? Maybe you could argue that actually in the Western world, by, taking the easy way out of taking immigration, we've actually been awarding ourselves this huge subsidy, because to have a society that has this many people, we'd have to fix so many problems normally that we just get to not fix because we're not dealing with them right now. But maybe that's a bit more of a philosophical question than one about policy. So now I figured I did promise you I would dive into the country which has the lowest birth rate in the world, and I thought this was interesting because if you look at the Asian birth rates, you can see in Afghanistan they're surprisingly high. Honestly, if you look at the list of countries with the highest birth rates, it almost perfectly lines up with countries where bad things are happening, which kind of goes back to that theory of let's have a war then end it. But if we look at the very, very bottom of the chart, Hong Kong has 0.77 births per woman. That is nuts if you think about it. It means that even if every woman only has one child, 23% of women will just never have one. And realistically, most women can end up having more than one child. But in South Korea, it's 0.81, which is also very, very crazy. The lowest for a sovereign country in Asia, and the lowest for a country anywhere in the world, which is nuts, because they are a country that has come out of poverty very rapidly. They have become very wealthy very quickly, but they've presented themselves with a huge problem, and what can they do about it? Well, their solution is to offer parents a lot of money. South Korean parents are being showered with cash, is how this Al Jazeera article puts it. But despite the fact that they are giving a bunch of money to parents, despite the fact that they have some great, you can see there's payments, there's other benefits, there's all sorts of fun systems in place, but no matter how much money they get per month for a child, no matter how much money they get to help with their education, it's just not actually helping them. It's not going to in any way alleviate South Korea's demographic woes. In fact, an interesting quote from the Prime Minister here was that maybe we could have some bold measures. One of the ideas that kind of came up was the fact that you could maybe have some foreign domestic workers work for less than minimum wage so that your house can be clean and you can focus on looking after your children. In reality, the most cited reasons come as job insecurity, housing instability, and other economic factors, because if you don't feel stable in your life, you're not going to have children. You can't just pop out a child now and ask questions later. I mean, let's be honest, there's a substantial number of people who do that, but a lot of rational people are dissuaded by the idea that if their life isn't in order, they shouldn't be having children. Why have children if you aren't sure about yourself? And as society creates increasing problems, how are you going to deal with that? And if I was to interject my own opinion at the end here, I would say look at like two charts side by side. Look at the number of homes we make in the UK, which is, again, this is basically it just shows it's been flat. We reached our peak somewhere in like 1968, and we've never come back to that. So if you look at the number of homes that we build in a given year, and then we compare that to the amount the population increases in a given year, you can see that the population is going up quite steadily with massive spikes here or there. The biggest spike starting around 2004. Interestingly, it's because we joined the EU and we didn't put you are allowed to have a cap on immigration from certain countries when a lot of them joined the EU, but the UK decided not to. Huge number of people came in and there was an economic boom, but instead of spending that economic boom in 2004 on building more houses, well, we built some until 2007 and then we just spiraled downwards and we've never even recovered from that. We are not building the number of houses that people need. And, this is just one example of investment that you're meant to have in people. We also have to build new education facilities and new hospitals and new everything out, roads and trains and all these things. And if by choosing not to spend that money, by choosing instead to have a bit more for ourselves, we get to be temporarily richer but create a bigger and bigger problem for our future selves. This is a sad part of the human story, but it's one of those things that I guess if you know about, you can think, okay, let's just keep this going at least until I'm dead, and then everyone else can solve the problem. And we've been doing that for a long time now. Let's hope it doesn't come to burst during our lifetimes, huh? Isn't that a good solution to the problem? But more seriously though, yeah, the world is going through some bad birth rate problems, and what is the solution? We don't really have one. We do know that people themselves will get, if you can solve people's problems, they'll have the children, but solving people's problems is hard, and I don't know. Given that right now we do have a growing world population, it's, you know, we can solve those problems in the future. For the meantime, we can just borrow some people from these countries that have too many. Anyway, with that said, I hope that you enjoy. Oh, by the way, I didn't even mention China and their one-child policy today, and the fact that they had to reverse that. Now, if you look at them, they're actively, you know, like if you look at countries in terms of pro-natalist or anti-natalist, China is actively gone from don't have children or we will ruin their life to please have children or we'll ruin your life. It's a funny thing to me. Anyway, with that said, this is a fun map, by the way, of countries that are pro or anti-natalist. You've got countries literally saying we need to lower the birth rate, and other countries right next door saying we really need to raise the birth rate. And so that's why a lot of pragmatic people say, what if we just move the people from there to there? But eventually that will run out, and then what we do, I don't know. What I do know though is if you enjoyed this video, consider supporting over at patreon.com/toycat. I have taken a bit more of a plunge into this channel, diving into fun things like this, and if you want to see more videos like this with the, you might notice all the fun things we're doing here, then you can support over there, and you'll get to be on a fun new map coming soon. I won't clarify anymore, but I'll say that now, and I'll say thank you. I'll see you next time. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.